In the summer of 1897, the high desert of New Mexico bled, not from a drought that would wither the crops, not from the old wars that had scarred the land, but from something with teeth and a thirst that no man could fathom. The territorial marshal, Santiago Vigil, a man built of grit and the law, dismissed the first reports as coyote attacks, then rabid dogs. He clung to his logic like a drowning man to a spar. But men like Eliseo Montoya, good, honest ranchers, whose lives were etched into the very soil, they swore to something else, something that walked on two legs, but was no man, something ancient. What happened there should have stayed buried, folded into the vast, silent history of that unforgiving land. But the desert keeps its secrets only so long, and I was there. Just a surveyor's assistant, a boy really, charting property lines with a chain and a compass, marking out the future of ranches that would soon become hunting grounds. I saw the sun bake the land hard, saw the dust rise in every breeze, coating everything in a fine, gritty film. And then I saw the shadows lengthen, and the real owners of that land come out to claim what was theirs. I was Mateo Delgado then, barely into my 20s, with a frame that was more wiry than strong, but capable enough for the work. My skin was already dark from the relentless New Mexico sun, and my eyes, I suppose, held a cautious intelligence, always scanning the horizon, always measuring. I wore the practical denim and leather of the working man, already worn soft and faded by the sun and the dust. I rode in with the spring, my saddlebags holding little more than my tools, and a few changes of clothes, tasked with mapping boundaries for the territorial government. It was honest work, if a lonely one, traversing the vast stretches between Mora and Las Vegas, where the ranches were isolated pockets of human endeavor, adobe structures blending into the landscape, surrounded by corrals, sheep pens, and small, dusty vegetable plots. Life here was hard, yes, a constant struggle against the elements, but it was predictable. The sun rose, the sun set. The sheep grazed, the goats bred, the coyotes howled, and the mountain lions stalked, but their patterns were known, their hunger understandable. The initial reports came in like whispers on the wind, dismissed almost as quickly as they were heard. A dead goat here, a sheep there. Nothing unusual, the ranchers would say, shrugging, before adding the strange part, the detail that made their voices drop. Asterisk, no blood. Asterisk, just two small, precise punctures at the throat. Like a snake bite, some said, but larger, deeper. Marshal Santiago Vigil, a man whose presence filled any room, his broad shoulders and weathered face, framed by a neatly trimmed mustache, would nod gravely, then dismiss it. Mountain lion, he'd declare, his voice gravelly, or perhaps a rabid dog. Keep your pens secure. He was a man of facts, of evidence, and the frontier had taught him to rationalize the inexplicable. He took pride in his ability to bring order to chaos, to explain away the superstitions that clung to the old adobe walls like dust. His dark uniform, always well maintained despite the desert, spoke of authority. He commanded respect, and his word was usually enough. But the reports did not stop. They trickled, then they mounted, and the details, when pieced together, began to form a pattern that defied his logic, defied the natural order of things. It was always the same: bloodless carcasses, those two precise holes, and never a struggle. No scattered feathers, no torn wool, no drag marks in the dust. The animals simply lay there, serene in death, as if they had simply gone to sleep. Sometimes they were arranged in odd, geometric patterns, a small triangle of goats here, a neat line of chickens there. That was the detail that truly began to prick at the edges of my pragmatic mind, even as I continued my surveying work, mapping out the very land these strange deaths were occurring on. Who, or what, killed with such methodical precision? Then came Eliseo Montoya. Eliseo was a respected sheep rancher from near Mora, a man in his early 60s whose lean, strong build spoke of a life of hard labor. his face etched with the lines of sun and worry. He wore the traditional ranchero clothing, a worn sombrero often shading his eyes, which held a deep, quiet knowledge of the land, a wisdom that went beyond maps and deeds. When Eliseo Montoya spoke, people listened. And when he arrived at Marshal Vigil's office in Las Vegas, his face paled beneath his tan, his usual stoicism replaced by a profound, raw fear. Even Vigil sat up straighter. I happened to be in the office that day, turning in some completed survey charts, the scent of old paper and dust thick in the air. The sun, already high, beat down mercilessly outside. Eliseo removed his sombrero, twisting it in his gnarled hands. "Marshal," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "It has returned." Vigil, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward. "What has returned, Eliseo? Another cougar, perhaps? We can send a hunting party." Montoya shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance, perhaps back to his ranch, to the empty pens he had left behind. "No, Marshal, not a cougar, not a dog. It was a thing." He paused, searching for words, his eyes wide and haunted. "I saw it, under the full moon, 2 nights ago. It was bright as day, but the shadows were long, playing tricks." Vigil made a dismissive sound, but his eyes were fixed on Montoya. He knew Eliseo. This was no drunkard's tale, no flight of fancy. "I went out to check the ewes," Montoya continued, his voice picking up a quiet intensity. The sound of the lambs was restless. "Then I saw it, standing by the goat pen. Not on all fours, Marshal, standing upright, hunched, gray, like a man, but not a man. Larger than any man I've ever seen, but thin, bony." He shuddered, a tremor running through his strong frame. Its eyes, Santiago, glowing, like amber coals in the night. It was watching my prize goats, my best breeding stock. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, listening from the corner of the room. This was no mountain lion, no rabid dog. Montoya's terror was too real. "I froze," Eliseo went on, his voice a low monotone. "I couldn't move. It was like it knew I was there, but it didn't care. It reached into the pen. Its arm was long. It grabbed a goat, a young buck, held it, and then so fast it just tilted its head. I heard a small gasp, a quick, wet sound, and then it dropped the goat, already dead. Bloodless, I swear to God. And then it moved to the next." Vigil's jaw was tight. "And what did you do, Eliseo?" "I screamed," Montoya admitted, his voice cracking, filled with shame. "I screamed like a child, and the thing, it looked at me, those eyes, they burned, and then it turned, and it leaped. Over the 6-foot fence, Marshal, clean, effortless, no sound. It just vanished into the shadows, into the arroyo." He finished, exhaling a long, ragged breath, still clutching his sombrero. "3 goats, Santiago, my best, all dead, all drained, and not a scratch on them, save those 2 small holes, exactly as the others reported. But I saw it. I saw times him asterisk." Vigil was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Montoya's distraught face. I watched him closely, seeing the wheels turn in his mind. He was a man of facts. But what fact could explain a hunched, upright creature with glowing amber eyes that leaped 6-foot fences and left bloodless carcasses? He cleared his throat, pushing away the unease that was starting to creep into the room. "Eliseo," he said, his voice firm, striving for control. It was dark. The moon plays tricks. The mind, it can conjure things in fear. Montoya finally looked at Vigil, his eyes piercing. "Marshal, you know me. I am not a man given to fancy. I saw what I saw. My grandfather told me stories when I was a boy. Stories of times El Chupador asterisk. The sucker. We thought they were just old legends, meant to keep children from wandering too far at night. But the desert keeps its secrets, and sometimes, Santiago, it lets them out." The air in the office grew heavy, thick with unspoken dread. Vigil, despite his efforts to remain composed, couldn't quite meet Montoya's gaze. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the sun-drenched street, at the dusty normalcy of the day. But I saw the crack in his resolve, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. As I left the marshal's office later that day, the sun still beating down, the world seemed to have shifted. The familiar landscape of sun-baked mesas and distant, snow-capped Sangre de Cristo foothills, usually so comforting in its stark beauty, now held a new, unsettling quality. The scent of piñon smoke and sun-baked earth was still in the air, but beneath it, I imagined I could smell something else, something metallic and acrid, like old blood. My practical mind, honed by measuring land and tracking livestock, struggled to reconcile what I had heard with what I knew to be true. Eliseo Montoya's fear, raw and genuine, was a contagion. It settled into my bones, a creeping unease that logic could not explain away. I had always believed in what I could see, what I could measure, what I could understand. But the image of a hunched, gray thing with amber eyes, effortlessly clearing a 6-foot fence, was a measurement I simply could not take. The desert, I realized, was not just silent. It was waiting, and I, a pragmatic young man, felt the first chill of a dread that would soon consume us all. The whispers had begun, and they spoke of something ancient and predatory, something that had awakened beneath the silent, indifferent sky of New Mexico. The whispers had begun, and they spoke of something ancient and predatory, something that had awakened beneath the silent, indifferent sky of New Mexico. The trickle of reports became a flood, not just near Mora or Las Vegas, but across the entire territory. Ranches from distant Pecos to the foothills near Taos reported the same impossible deaths. Goats, sheep, even a few cattle, all found bloodless, all with the same 2 precise punctures at the throat. The communal fear was a palpable thing, a weight pressing down on the high desert. It seeped into every conversation, every shadowed corner of the adobe homes, displacing the individual skepticism that had once been Marshal Vigil's shield. The territorial newspapers, initially dismissive, deriding the goat-sucker plague of '97 as mass hysteria or the work of inventive bandits, were forced to change their tune. Too many reputable ranchers, both Hispanic and Anglo, were coming forward with tales too similar, too horrific, to ignore. The consensus shifted from disbelief to a bewildered, terrified acknowledgement. This was no ordinary animal. This was something else. Marshal Vigil, his face etched deeper with worry lines each passing day, organized patrols. He deputized every able-bodied man, forming small, nervous groups that rode out into the vast, silent nights. I, a surveyor's assistant, found myself pressed into service, my keen eyes for tracking lines now repurposed for tracks of a different, more terrifying kind. We were armed, mostly with old rifles and scatterguns, and a desperate hope that a bullet could stop what logic could not explain. But these patrols proved largely ineffective, clumsy, loud, and predictable. We were children stumbling in the dark. The creature, El Chupador, as Eliseo Montoya had named it, seemed to learn our routines with unnerving speed. It moved with a silent, calculating patience, striking at isolated homesteads during the new moon phases when the darkness was absolute, a suffocating blanket that swallowed light and sound. The ranches, once open and welcoming, became fortresses. Doors were barred, windows shuttered, livestock brought into the closest possible corrals. But fear, I learned, was a corrosive agent. It ate at the edges of men's courage, turning neighbor against neighbor in whispered accusations, making every creak of the wind sound like a footfall. The unnatural silence that had begun to fall over the ranches at night grew deeper. The usual symphony of the desert, the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of night birds, disappeared. It was replaced by an unsettling void, a profound quiet that pressed down on the ears, making the blood pound louder in one's own head. It was the sound of a predator, I realized. Not just hunting, but time's listening asterisk. One night, the darkness was absolute. The new moon had retreated entirely, leaving the sky a velvet black, dotted with a million pinprick stars that offered no solace. I was part of a patrol, riding with Deputy Ortega, a quiet man whose usual stoicism was now frayed at the edges, and a young ranch hand named Joaquin. Joaquin was barely older than me, perhaps 19, with a nervous energy that vibrated beneath his skin. He clutched his rifle like it was a lifeline, his eyes darting into every shadow. We were near the arroyo that snaked through Eliseo Montoya's land, the same arroyo where he swore the thing had vanished. The air was cold, dry, carrying the scent of dust and juniper. We rode slowly, our horses' hooves muffled by the soft earth, trying to be as quiet as the night itself. The silence was deafening. No crickets, no wind, just the rhythmic thud of our horses' hooves and the ragged sound of our own breathing. "Keep your eyes open, Matt," Ortega whispered, his voice hoarse, "especially near the rock formations. It likes the shadows." I nodded, my eyes straining, trying to pierce the inky blackness. Every juniper bush seemed to take on a malevolent shape, every rock pile a hunched figure. My practical mind, the one that usually saw only contours and measurements, now saw only threats. Then, a smell. Not the metallic tang I'd begun to associate with the Chupador, but something else. Something warm and musky. Blood, but not old. Fresh. Ortega reined in his horse, holding up a hand. Joaquin's breath hitched. We dismounted, leaving our horses tethered, and moved forward on foot, rifles held ready. The smell grew stronger, leading us around a cluster of scrub oak. There, in a small clearing, under the indifferent gaze of the distant stars, lay a young calf. Its eyes, wide and lifeless, stared up at the impossible blackness of the sky. Its body was utterly exsanguinated, its hide slack, like a deflated sack, and at its throat, two small, precise punctures, clean as if made by a surgical instrument. Not a drop of blood on the ground, not a disturbed blade of grass. Joaquin whimpered, a low, guttural sound, and gripped his rifle so hard his knuckles turned white. "Stay vigilant," Ortega murmured, his voice tight. He knelt, checking the calf, then swept his gaze around the clearing. It hasn't been gone long. I felt it then. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched. The silence, which had been profound, now felt time's active asterisk. Like a coiled spring. "Tracks," I whispered, pointing to the soft earth near the calf. 3 toes, long claws, just like Maria Chavez had described. They led away from the kill, towards a rocky outcrop, clear for about 10 feet. And then they simply stopped, vanished, as if the thing had lifted into the air. Ortega saw it too. His face, usually so composed, was pale in the starlight. He swore under his breath, a low, desperate sound. It was in that moment, as we stood there, stunned by the impossible evidence, that we got our first terrifying partial glimpse. Not a full view, not a clear image, but enough. A shadow, deeper than the night itself, detached itself from the rocky outcrop where the tracks had ended. It moved with impossible speed, a fluid, unnatural grace that defied its hunched form. It wasn't running, not truly. It was gliding, a blur of motion at the very edge of our vision. And then, it paused, just for a fraction of a second, against the backdrop of a distant, faint sliver of cloud passing across the Milky Way, a silhouette too tall to be an animal, too hunched to be a man, 2 times wrong times to be anything natural. And then, 2 points of light, amber eyes. They glowed with an internal fire, fixing on us, burning through the absolute darkness. A flash, a searing, intelligent gaze, and then it was gone, vanished into the deeper shadows beyond the rocks, leaving only the image burned onto our retinas. Joaquin screamed. His scream tore through the profound silence of the night, raw and utterly human. filled with a terror that clawed at the throat. He didn't stop, not even when Ortega tried to grab him, to quiet him. He just kept screaming, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the vast, empty desert. He had seen it. He had seen the eyes. "It knows we're here," Joaquin shrieked, tears streaming down his face, his body trembling violently. "It's watching us. It's playing with us." He dropped his rifle, clutching his head, his screams degenerating into hysterical sobs. The psychological strain, the relentless dread, the impossible sights. It had finally broken him. Ortega pulled Joaquin back towards the horses, trying to calm him, but the young man was lost to terror. I stood frozen, my rifle still raised, my eyes fixed on the spot where the amber glow had been. Joaquin's screams, though terrifying, felt almost like a distraction. The real terror was the silence that settled back in the moment he stopped screaming, the profound, listening void. And then I saw it again, not moving, not fleeing. It was standing on a low ridge, perhaps 100 yards away, perfectly still, just a deeper shadow against the black. But this time, it did something. It tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, a gesture so chillingly human, yet utterly wrong on that inhuman form. It was watching us, studying us, and in that deliberate tilt, I sensed a cold, calculating intelligence. It wasn't frightened, it wasn't surprised, it was observing, learning. It felt less like a predatory animal and more like a cruel, patient observer. It had struck a young, defenseless calf, a simple act of sustenance. But then it had waited, allowing us to find the kill, to see the impossible tracks, to witness its fleeting shadow, to feel its gaze. It was toying with us, demonstrating a restraint that was more terrifying than mindless slaughter. It hadn't attacked us. It hadn't even truly hidden. It had simply shown times itself, enough to shatter our minds, enough to sow a deeper, more insidious fear. That subtle, almost smile in the way it tilted its head, a gesture I might have imagined but felt with utter certainty, was the most chilling thing of all. It was not a smile of amusement, but of cold, alien comprehension. It knew, it understood, and it was letting us know that it understood us too. That night, the creature's intelligence became horribly clear. It was not just a beast, it was a calculating entity, a hunter with a mind, playing a long, terrifying game. And we, the armed patrols, the men of law and order, were merely its pawns. Joaquin's screams had faded into broken sobs, swallowed by the vast, uncaring desert. Ortega had somehow managed to get him back on his horse, half dragging the man, who was now a trembling, useless heap of fear. I rode beside them, my own hands clamped tight on the reins, my eyes still scanning the ridgeline where the creature had stood. It was gone, of course. But the image of that tilted head, the implied, knowing intelligence, was burned into my mind. It wasn't just a hunter, it was something that understood, something that played. The patrols continued after that, but the heart had gone out of them. Joaquin was sent back to his family, a broken man who couldn't be coaxed to say a single word about that night. His fear was a contagion. Every ranch hand, every deputy, every man who rode out under the new moon now carried the weight of Joaquin's terror. We were no longer hunting a beast. We were being hunted ourselves by an entity that seemed to know our every move, to anticipate our every thought. The new moon phases became nights of absolute dread. The Chupador, or creatures we never knew if it was one or many, and that uncertainty was a torment in itself, would strike with terrifying precision. They'd bypass the most heavily guarded ranches, only to hit a smaller, more isolated homestead miles away, always leaving the same signature: bloodless carcasses, those twin punctures, and the impossible tracks. There were no more glimpses, no more wrong smiles. The creature had made its point. It had shown us its intelligence, its patience, its utter contempt for our efforts. Now, it simply killed. Marshal Vigil, his face now a roadmap of exhaustion and defeat. Tried everything. He brought in more men from Las Vegas, tried to coordinate a perimeter, but the desert was too vast, the enemy too elusive. The silence at night grew deeper, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on every ranch house. The usual sounds of the high desert, the coyotes, the night birds, the rustle of wind through the pinyons had vanished, replaced by an unsettling void that screamed of lurking malevolence. It was Eliseo Montoya's ranch that suffered the final, devastating blow. Perhaps the Chupador had a particular grudge against Eliseo, the first to speak its name, the one who tried to warn us. Or perhaps it was simply the most isolated, the most vulnerable during that particularly dark new moon, a night when the sky was a blanket of absolute black, not even a star piercing through the heavy cloud cover. We were there, a dozen men, including Vigil, Ortega, and myself, along with Eliseo and his sons. We had fortified the adobe house as best we could, barricading windows, sharpening stakes. We waited, rifles loaded, nerves frayed. The air was thick with the smell of old dust, fresh fear, and the metallic tang I now knew so well. The attack, when it came, was not a clumsy assault. It was a terrifying, coordinated siege. It began with the sudden, simultaneous destruction of the sheep pens. A chorus of bleats cut short, then a sickening silence. We heard the frantic whinnying of horses from the corrals, then the thud of bodies hitting the earth. Not a single gunshot, not a single shout from the attackers. Just the sounds of impossible, silent slaughter. Then, the house itself. Not a frontal charge. The creature, or creatures, seemed to test our defenses. Moving around the perimeter, their presence felt more than seen. A scratching sound, impossibly loud, at a window. Then, a sudden, violent splintering of wood. We fired into the darkness, but there was nothing to shoot at, only the echoes of our own desperate blasts. A shadow would detach itself from the roofline, drop to the ground with a soft thud, and vanish again. It was as if the very darkness had come alive, pressing in on us. From inside, we could hear the sounds of the farm animals dying, one by one, methodically, impossibly fast. It wasn't about hunger anymore. It was about terror, about breaking us. Marshal Vigil, his face grim, his eyes reflecting the flickering lamplight, knew it was over. His usual commanding presence was replaced by a profound weariness. He had seen too much. He had fought too long against an enemy that defied logic, an enemy that could not be reasoned with or shot down. "We cannot hold this," he said, his voice raw, not quite a whisper. "They know our positions. They are playing with us. We will lose men for nothing." He looked at Eliseo, whose face was a mask of stoic defeat, his family's livelihood being systematically destroyed outside. Eliseo simply nodded, his gaze distant, resigned. He had known this was coming. He had tried to tell us. "Ortega," Vigil continued, "gather the men. We retreat. Now." A strategic retreat. A surrender. The marshal of the territory, a man who had faced down bandits and desperados, was ordering a retreat from shadows. It was the ultimate humiliation, the ultimate acknowledgement of defeat, but it was also the only choice, the only way to save what little life was left. We moved quickly, quietly, slipping out the back door, leaving the ranch to its fate. The darkness was absolute. I was at the rear, my heart hammering against my ribs, my rifle clutched tight. The sounds of the Chupador at work were still faintly audible, a chilling testament to their continued presence. It was as I scrambled through a narrow arroyo, trying to keep pace with Ortega and the others, that I saw it. The full, horrifying revelation. It was standing on a low ridge, perhaps 20 yards away, silhouetted against the faintest, almost imperceptible lightning of the eastern horizon that hinted at dawn. It was tall, nearly 7 feet, but hunched, its back curving in a grotesque, unnatural arc. Its skin, what I could discern of it in the gloom, was a mottled, textured gray, like dried mud or ancient rock. Its limbs were thin, almost skeletal, yet held in coiled power. Its head was small, pointed, with a narrow snout, but dominated by those eyes. They were not merely amber, they burned, a molten, intelligent glow that pierced the darkness, fixing on me. I saw no smile this time, no deliberate tilt of the head, only a profound, ancient intelligence, a patience that stretched beyond human reckoning. It wasn't surprised I saw it. It wasn't trying to hide. It was simply times their asterisk, watching, and in those eyes, I saw not malice, not hunger, but something far more terrifying, a cold, alien comprehension. It knew I was leaving. It knew I was escaping. And it knew I would carry its image, its truth, with me forever. My breath caught in my throat. My legs, despite my terror, obeyed some primal command. I stumbled, nearly fell, scrambling up the other side of the arroyo, not daring to look back again until I had put a good distance between us. When I finally risked a glance over my shoulder, the ridge was empty. The creature had vanished as silently as it had appeared. Only the echo of its burning gaze remained in my mind. We rode through the rest of the night, a silent, defeated procession, the rising sun painting the sky with colors that seemed sacrilegious after the horrors we had witnessed. Eliseo Montoya's ranch was abandoned, its livestock decimated, its buildings bearing the scars of an impossible assault. The official word came swiftly, cleanly, from Santa Fe. The goat sucker plague of '97 was dismissed as mass hysteria, fueled by old superstitions, exacerbated by banditry and a string of unusually fierce mountain lion attacks. Marshal Vigil, for his part, submitted a report that carefully omitted any mention of glowing amber eyes or three-toed tracks. He spoke of cunning thieves, of panicked ranchers exaggerating their losses, of the harsh realities of the frontier. He was a man of the law, and the law had no category for what we had faced. The truth was buried, deemed too unbelievable, too unsettling for the burgeoning territory of New Mexico. It was easier to attribute it to human folly and animal instinct than to confront the unknowable. Time passed, as it always does. The wounds of that summer slowly scabbed over, fading into the background of a bustling, modernizing world. The railroads brought new people, new ideas. The old ways, the old fears, were pushed aside, forgotten by those who hadn't lived through it. But for those of us who had, the truth never really disappeared. I left the surveying business not long after, the lines on the land no longer holding the same meaning. The vast, empty spaces of the desert, once a canvas for my work, became a reminder of its true, ancient owners. I moved east, built a life, raised a family. My hands, once precise with a transit, grew gnarled with age. My back, once straight, began to stoop. But the memory of that summer, of those amber eyes, never faded. Now, decades later, I sit by my window, the setting sun casting long shadows across the faded map on my wall. The ranches I once surveyed are still there, their lines blurred by time and memory. The world has changed, but the desert, that vast, indifferent sea of rock and dust, remains. And in its deepest arroyos, its darkest caves, its most forgotten corners, I know it waits. El Chupador, the sucker. It was not a beast of instinct. It was a patient, ancient horror, an intelligence that saw us as nothing more than temporary guests, a passing nuisance. It learned our ways, toyed with our fears, and then, when it had made its point, it simply retreated into the shadows, waiting for the cycle to begin again. We didn't defeat it. We merely survived its attention. And I, Mateo Delgado, carry the weight of that secret, knowing that the desert still holds its breath, forever waiting for the next new moon, for the next time the shadows lengthen, and the real owners of that land come out to claim what is theirs. They are still there. They are always there, watching, waiting, and they will outlast us all.